So on behalf of the Princeton Club of South Florida, welcome to this discussion of Princeton's pre-read for this school year. And we're honored to have the author of Every Day the River Changes, 4 weeks down the Magdalena, Jordan Salama from the class of 19, join us for this conversation. And I told Jordan that he doesn't have to stay with us for the whole time, but we're really pleased to have him. And I think it's great to have the author of a book here when you're actually talking about the book. So I think maybe what we'll do is just, Jordan, do you want to talk initially and then we'll ask you some questions, or how would you like to do this?
Sure. Do you guys want to see pictures?
Yeah.
Would that be interesting? Okay.
Yeah.
Let me find that.
I noticed there are no pictures in your book.
Yeah, that was I did. What was the group? It was a group in Washington. I think it was the Princeton Alumni Club of like Washington, Virginia, like Delmarva area.
Yeah.
And like for like 20 minutes, we debated whether or not the book should have pictures or not. And the group was split. But actually, it had nothing to do with me. I had a lot of pictures, but it's too expensive to print them. So,
yep.
So Instagram is where all my pictures are. But what I'll do now is I will hold on. I will share my screen.
Yep.
And show you some. Wait. Can you see that?
Yes. There you go.
Cool. All right. Well, that's me. First of all, thank you all for reading the book. It's amazing to me that this ended up happening in the way that it did to be the pre-read. It's just a wild experience. But this is a slideshow that I showed to a group of administrators at the university, because I was there for a month in September, and they had me like visiting classes and doing workshops and talking about the book in like all sorts of different capacities. And one of them was to talk to like different departments and administrators so that they could talk with the kids about the book. And so I showed them this, but really it's just a slideshow of pictures from the trip. This was from Quinchana, near the start of the river, near the source in that small town where I climbed up with Luis Manuel Salamanca looking for megalithic statues. Let's see here. Hold on. Aha. Megalithic statues.
Wow.
Pretty amazing stuff. And met people like this man's name was Rafael. And this is the main town strip of Quinchana. Very small, as you can see. This is about it, the whole town. And if you keep going along that road further back and over that hill and then down a path and far up, you get to the actual source of the river. This is what the river looks like in that area, which is called the Colombian Massif. And it's this like kind of like raised knot of rolling green hills with mountains in the background, but mostly they're like low hills here. This is Delfin Borrero, the man who makes canoes. He was making canoes in the city of Neiva for like decades, and his granddaughter playing in the canoes, which I mentioned in the book as well. This was in Estación Cocorná, the small town where I went looking for the invasive hippopotamuses.
There they are.
There they are.
Amazing story.
Yeah, and that was a wild story. And there you can see in the boat, there's Isabel Romero, the turtle woman. Next to her is David Echeverri, who was the biologist mitigating this problem of the hippopotamuses. Next to me is Saulo Hoyos, one of the famous biologists of the Magdalena River. And behind them are a few members from the community, including Alvarito, which is a guy who I spent a lot of time with flying kites. Here is Alvarito on the left with another kid from the town making kites out of plastic and stalks of river grass. And this is them flying the kites. And this is one of my favorite pictures, which I'll always remember, from Estación Cocorná, where you could see on the left the group of people, and on the right the kite high in the air. This is a chalupa, one of the small fast ferries, one of the only moments in the trip where I was actually traveling down the river by boat, because a lot of it isn't navigable anymore. And we took this for about 7 hours down a stretch of the river. In the back, you can see a mountain range called the San Lucas Mountains. And I traveled on this leg of the journey with a woman named Alejandra Mallorca, who's now a dear friend of mine. That was me in 2018 when she said, let's take a selfie. And she immediately posted this picture to Facebook. Let's see. This is Mompos, the town of Mompos, where I like to say time stands still, where I met Simon Villanueva, the filigree jeweler. who spent 75 years basically crafting silver and gold filigree jewelry. So his craftsmanship is amazing. This is Luis Soriano, the famous Biblioburro, the donkey library of Colombia. He goes through the savannas and farmlands, bringing books to school children at home so they could practice reading in their houses. There are the kids reading. And that's me at the end of the Magdalena in Barranquilla, near where the river meets the sea. And yeah, those are the pictures that I have now. I have lots of others online that you could find in different places. There was one group from Princeton that made an interactive map of the journey, which was super cool, where you can like go on Google Maps and like follow bit by bit. So if you Google like every day the river changes interactive map, you can find that. But yeah, that's those are my pictures. And
So Jordan,
yeah.
how much did the book, how much did your thesis change in the book? Obviously, there was a death between the time when you wrote the thesis and when the book was published. But any other big changes in view or contents or approach?
Yeah, I think it changed a lot. But then I was talking last week with my thesis advisor, and she went back and looked through all of her emails and the old drafts that I sent her, which I'm scared to look at. And she said that it didn't change as much as she thought, but I still do think that it changed a lot, and it changed in a couple like very important ways. One was that, well, so like the journey didn't change, like it's the same trip, the same reporting, all that. But where it did change was like I was not present in the thesis, like me as a voice or like a character of a guiding eye thing. And also, I don't think that the thesis really read like a book. I think it read like a collection of different encounters and conversations, but it didn't necessarily read like a book that you could go from beginning to end and follow this journey. And I think the two things are linked. But when I went through the process of working with an editor at the book publisher, she was also really set on my voice being not the center of the story, but just like an important fixture there so that readers could follow along. And so I could be like a bridge. And I think that worked kind of well. Some ways the book changed for the worse was that I had color photos in my thesis, but oh well, yeah.
And did I know I saw in your bibliography you had mentioned some travel logs. Were you? And I heard you when you asked at the freshman assembly how many people had read a travelogue, and what you had like 2 hands raised, 3 hands.
Literally, like it was shocking to me how few people raised their hand.
How about you? Had you read a lot of travelogues before you wrote the book?
I had. I read a lot of like Paul Theroux and Bruce Chatwin's book In Patagonia. And I don't know, I really like stories about journeys. And it also felt easier to write. I think it's easy to write because it's just a chronicle of what happened, but not like today I did this and today and the next day I did that, but like kind of weaving together the journey as if people are coming along with you. That's what I liked about those kinds of books. And so I wanted to like try my hand at doing it myself. Yeah.
I don't mean to monopolize questions here while we have Jordan, but I'll keep asking unless somebody else.
I'll go.
Good.
Jordan, nice to meet you. My mother's from Peru, and I kind of a lot of the topography and the racial groups, rang very similar, obviously, with these countries, and kind of starting from the top and the elevation and working your way down. One question, which kind of what you touched on here, your voice at the beginning, it seemed a lot more like just a description of your trip, and then as it progressed, like your voice came through of your different heritage and. Was that just my impression, or was it sort of structured to be that way that it kind of transitions more into almost an autobiography by the end?
I don't know if that was the intention. My intention was always to leave myself out of it as much as possible.
Okay.
So it's possible that in the first half of the book I won, and in the second half of the book I lost. But I wanted to stay out of it because I didn't think that it was like necessarily. I didn't want to monopolize like my voice to monopolize it.
It seemed like maybe as you learned more about Colombia, then you made more of a connection with some of the, the violence and the stresses and all that stuff, and then connected to it more.
Yeah, I think that what happened was as the trip went on, I started to learn more about myself and like to understand, to realize why I was actually doing this and why I'm not Colombian. I'm Argentinian and Middle Eastern and all sorts of things, but I'm not Colombian. And I was like, why did I end up at this random river with these random people in this country that I have no connection to? Like, how did that all come to be? And it turned out that I was thinking about that a lot while I was on the river, but I didn't write it until maybe it was like those were the last parts of the book that I wrote, because that thinking process is still ongoing. I think like it didn't finish with the book, but it definitely, got bigger and bigger. And also I think that I was very, there's like a weird juxtaposition between myths and real stories in the book that is stronger for sure in the beginning than it is at the end. And I think that as the myths go away, my own family myths go up. That was definitely on purpose, because I wanted to give people a really rich sense of the place and the people I was meeting and the situations that I was getting myself into before they got to know me.
Great, thank you.
I was very conscious as I was reading this, and you talked about the environmental conditions in Colombia, that in Florida, of course, we had a lot of the same problems. And when I think back to Florida 150 years ago and what it is now, it's a lot different. And I wonder, at least in Florida, a lot of money is being spent, arguably not enough, to try and bring back some of the conditions that were here before it was settled, by people coming south. Are you optimistic about Colombia, or are you pessimistic that the kinds of changes that are going to have to take place to sort of restore the environment and the Magdalena will ever occur?
I don't know. I think about this a lot. I don't know if I hesitate to say, because I'm not really an authority on any of this, but it's like hard for me to say if I'm optimistic or pessimistic. But I think that what I feel about Colombia, I feel about a lot of other countries in Latin America that I've reported from and been to, which is that there's this big wrestling question between groups of people who really, really want and care about, like local people really care, from the conversations that I had, care about their land and their water, and they depend on it and they want it to be healthy because human health and environmental health are tied together. But at the same time, they're also fighting against, serious food insecurity, and they have to do basically whatever they can to get by. So that back and forth is a big paradox for people, and it doesn't help that, for years and years and years, there have been all sorts of systems against those local people. But all is to say that I think that there is an increasing understanding now, at least from the conversations that I've continued to have over the past few years, of how the bigger systems can actually work with local people and what they need and what they want. And as long as those conversations get better and better, then that is good. But of course, objectively, the situation is just getting worse. There's more droughts, there's more floods, there's more deforestation. So I don't know if it's a cut and dry answer of am I optimistic or pessimistic, but I think that the right conversations are happening. I just think it'll be a question in the end of do the right conversations end up outweighing corporate interests and government interests, and also the lengths people are willing to go in desperation that is also being worsened by these problems, right? It's like a total positive feedback snowball thing.
Just to follow up on that, so whenever this story, and when I travel to a lot of Latin America and the developing world, I think about America and the US and how, the US went through these things and we just developed and didn't, a lot of our species don't exist. A lot of the natural areas don't exist. The rivers have concrete sides and are fully dredged. And, we've just done the work of developing these areas and really at a lot of loss of these natural environments.
Totally. And what does development even mean? That's a super important point. Yeah.
And so, so it's, it's just a lot of the developing world is still, just a little bit behind. And I don't, I'm pessimistic because of what we see in, Europe and in the US, that, ultimately we decide that it's better to do the thing that makes the most money. And a lot of what is driving like the failure to dredge the Magdalena is that the economic interests of it don't exist. But if it's there, it will get dredged and they will continue with the development.
Right.
Yeah, I think I also saw it the same way, sort of as a warning to us about what can happen if we just don't address these issues now, because it applies to almost every country that you visit. There's some aspect of these types of issues happening. Kind of scary.
Well, one of the really cute things I saw was your description of the different transportation methods that you came across, which and this moto balilena was an amazing invention. Any chance you have a photograph of that thing? Because I'm trying to visualize.
It's terrible. I have one I can try to pull it up from another part of Colombia, but not the one that I traveled on, which is sad. Let me see if I have it quickly that I could. But because everybody asks for it.
Yeah.
But I didn't take a picture of it. I only took a picture from it. Let me see. Hold on. Wait. Oh yeah, here it is. Okay. Let me see something. Okay. You see that?
Wow.
Wow.
Yeah, it's something like that. But instead of this like blue mat, this like blue bench, the whole thing in the case when I was traveling on it was plastic like patio chairs.
So individual chairs, like facing forward.
Yeah, facing
Yeah.
forward. And like depending on how big that platform is, it's it could fit like up to 7 or 8 people.
And those wheels at the bottom would fit on the rails.
Yeah, they're the wheels of a train.
And the motorcycle, there weren't a lot of ties that would make that motorcycle ride a really bumpy ride, or, railroad ties that you have the wood underneath of the rails. That wasn't the case
Yeah.
for these rail beds.
That's a good question. I think the back wheel of the motorcycle actually somehow they made it such that it was on the rail itself.
Huh.
So the propulsion is coming from the rear wheel of the motorcycle directly. Okay.
Exactly.
And you mentioned that your next trip is to Jordan relating to trains. Are trains going to be a continuing theme that we're going to see in the literature of Jordan Salama?
It probably will be. I am very interested in train trips. I think for the same reason I'm interested in river trips, because you don't have to worry about like where you're going and you kind of just focus on having conversations with people. It's a very like easy way of doing these kind of journeys. And it's also interesting to me. I wrote a story in National Geographic this summer about taking the train across America from New York to San Francisco, which you may all enjoy if you like trains. Yeah.
Did you find other tourists along the way?
On the train trip across America or
No, Magdalena. I mean, like how touristy is it?
Well, depending on where I was, because in some parts of the country, like some of the air stops along the Magdalena are more touristy than others. Like in Estación Cocorná, for the most part, no, except for one group that I pointed out that was from Medellin that came in. In San Agustin, though, for example, like where those statues are, there were people like foreigners there, especially from Europe. But at that time, it still wasn't like, well, I went in 2016 first, and then I did the Magdalena in 2018. In 2016, I barely saw any foreigners at all. In 2018, I saw a lot more, but still not as many as I started to see in 2019 and the beginning of 2020, but when I went again.
Is Colombia on your list of places you go every year now? No.
Not on purpose, but it has so happened that because of this book, I've gotten assignments to do other related stories. Right now, I'm working on a story for National Geographic about cumbia, and like cumbia music and the environmental history of cumbia and how it's used to like tell stories about land and water, and how that's kind of been lost. And now people are using cumbia to tell stories about all these declines that have been mentioned. So that sent me back to the Magdalena. It's so funny because every time I go to Colombia, I think to myself, well, the world is big and there's, a lot of places to see. I don't think I'm going to be back here again. Maybe I won't, but then I always am. So it's funny how these things happen.
Jordan, I really like the way you interacted with the characters in the book. I mean, I felt that you were never invasive. You were always respectful, and that you had these boundaries about not really becoming too inquisitive. And I was wondering if that was a conscious strategy that you learned as you, progressed down the river, that, that you didn't want to inquire too much about personal affairs, or because sometimes I felt I would like to know more about the person's personal life and you just didn't go there. So I was just curious about how you made those decisions.
It was conscious. I think that if you do find out about the person's personal life, it's because they offered it to me and not because I asked. Because at the end of the day, like, this book is about the people who I met, but it's not really about the people's personal lives so much as it is about how they live and where they live and how their lives relate to the context of the place, but not really like, are they married? Like, what are their kids like? Or do they, are they a good person or bad person or whatever that means? If that is offered up, like in the case of Alejandra, who had that accident and marked the way she lived, like, yes. But if it's like Simon Villanueva, the jeweler, I was much more interested in who he was in relation to his work than I was in like what his personal situation was.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Abram. Great.
So first of all, thanks for sharing the book. It was great, a bunch of great stories. On that point about how people lived and like, their livelihoods, their lifestyles, and seeing people that found their livelihoods in ways that are so different from how we experience things here in the United States. What did you learn about how people prioritize their lives, about how people find value in their time here? Like, what did you learn as you explored that side of people's lives?
I thought about that a lot, and I continue to think about it now, especially when I have these kinds of conversations, and most poignantly when I had the conversations with the students at Princeton in September, because that was all they wanted to talk about, was like, what are we doing? Like, how are we spending our time? Like, what are we doing with our lives? What's the meaning of things? And am I doing what I'm passionate about? And I think that there were two like dueling things in the way, and I write about this in the book. It's like, on the one hand, there were very obvious signs that people prioritized family a lot more. People were in the company of others and living in contexts where they were constantly surrounded by people who they cared about. And in large part, this book is also comprised of people who are working on things that they're really passionate about and really inspired by. At the same time, it was important to me to contextualize that and say, like, okay, well, some of the reasons behind these things are more complicated than they might seem. People are sitting outside all the time in Estación Cocorná, partly because that's part of the culture and how people like to spend their leisure time, but also because a lot of people didn't have air conditioning or round-the-clock electricity, and it was so damn hot in their houses that they literally couldn't stay inside. In other cases, it's because people didn't have jobs, or because, I don't know, there were forms of community sharing that were going on for resources or food, things like that. And then also, importantly, this idea of working towards what you're passionate about also runs into the question of how do people make a living and how do people make their money, because money is important for many people. It's an issue for a lot of people in this book. And so I wanted to make sure that I wasn't conflating those questions and keeping them in conversation with one another. But I think that despite all of that, there are these universal themes that can be taken away of like what kinds of personal, meaningful rewards can come, and community rewards can come with living a life of impact and of passion and doing things that you feel is a good way of spending your time, and how you're contributing to the people around you. I think that there's a lot there, especially when it comes to somebody like the jeweler Simon Villanueva. I think he had a lot to say about that in terms of like making sure that you were contributing positively and making what he called little flashes of beauty in a world of chaos and conflict. Like, I think that's something that I'm going to hold on to for a long time.
I was really moved by the story of the man who organized Biblio Burro to bring books to little kids in the country. It was just charming vignette. And I gather he's been very successful with it, not just locally, but in raising money internationally to support that effort.
Yeah, he's pretty famous actually, which is interesting. I mean, in Colombia, he's extremely famous, but he's also like gone now around the world and talked to people. He comes to the US a bit to talk sometimes. But what was really striking to me was you go to his town, and he has not changed, it seems. At least people say he has not changed in the past 25 years. Like, despite the recognition and the children's books that have been written about him and all the people who have come to visit him, his operation kind of stays the way it has been because that's what's necessary where he lives. And also, he said something to me that was very nice, but also I won't forget it. He was like, I've been interviewed by all these news outlets, the BBC, the New York Times, the Washington Post. And he said, it's always the same. They always, drive in their reporters with massive security. And like, this was in the time, like before 2016, but in the pre-peace situation, because it was in a difficult area. And he was like, and they'd spend a couple hours with me, ask the same questions and leave. But he's like, you're the first person who I feel like I've become friends with. And I was like, that is a compliment that I will be happy to receive, no matter how the story comes out. Is like, I spent several days with him. I went back, I met his family. Like we became close because what I wanted to do was have an exchange and not just feel like I was taking his story and running with it like everybody else. Because it has been told a lot, because he is well known. So I wanted to tell it in a way that hasn't been told before. And to get to that, I wanted to make sure I was like doing it in a way that was trustworthy, and that was, that he had confidence in me, and that he felt like he, that I was handling his story with respect.
Yeah.
That one seemed the one that you really kind of did get to know a bit, because you went back in time, and right, that story was decades long, right? So it's obviously a very powerful story, but was there anything in particular about it that you chose this one to go deep on, or it just kind of happenstance?
He is the kind of person who, when you spend time with him, it feels like he's telling you a story when he just speaks. And so he takes on this like almost like Garcia Marquez-esque magically real persona, because what he does is so amazing that it could be out of a storybook, I think, out of the storybooks that he shares with the kids. And so I wanted to write it almost that I could give it to him and he could tell his own story to other people.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. Which is what we did.
Yeah,
I translated it in Spanish. Yeah. And I gave it to him.
And the book is being translated into Spanish.
So they say in the year 2023, it should be out in Colombia. But, I won't believe it until I see the book.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You said that it was rejected by 53 publishers and editors before it finally got published.
Yeah.
What did you actually get logical reasons why they thought that it was not printable?
Yeah, it was almost all the same. Something to the tune of, we really like this. It's very interesting. It's well written, but no one's going to buy it. No one cares, basically. It's like, this market is very hard. Nobody knows you. If you were some known, if you were Anthony Bourdain, we could sell your book about the random river. But you're nobody. No one's going to buy your book.
Wow.
I can't say we proved them wrong, because the book was not like a bestseller or anything like that, but I feel like it held its own. It punched above its weight, I think. And Catapult ended up being the perfect publisher for it, which was good.
Got great reviews.
It was well received. Yeah, it was. I'm very grateful for how it ended up panning out. It also puts a weird pressure if I ever want to do this again. Yeah.
I did think of another prominent Princetonian who had enormous success coming out of his undergraduate years with his first book, F. Scott Fitzgerald. And arguably it took him, another 15 years before he, wrote with equal success for This Side of Paradise. But other than the fact that you both went to Princeton, and you both had a book published early out of school, there's not much other comparison that I find here. So
If I could write the Great Gatsby in the next 15 years, that would be pretty awesome. Though,
Yes,
so.
yeah, that would be.
Your career seems to be, you work for National Geographic, is that one of your, or you work at least partly for them? Obviously, your career has gone along the way of your thesis, right? Which doesn't always happen. It wasn't true in my case. Like, do you think that influenced kind of your life trajectory, like these two things? And
Yes, I think that, well, it's like a chicken and egg thing. Like I did the thesis because I knew I wanted to do this, but I think
Okay.
that had the thesis not gone as well as I had hoped, it would be a lot harder for me to do this now. Yeah, I think the book has helped. The fact that the book exists has helped, but it's still really hard. I mean, to be a freelancer, well, I'm not a freelancer right now. I am on staff this
Okay.
year until March for National Geographic, but then I'm going to be probably a freelancer again. And it's really hard to make a living. And so I've relied a lot on grants and fellowships, and Princeton has been good about that, but it's not easy. And so for as long as I can keep doing this, I will be happy, doing it. And it's what I want to do, but
Right.
it is not easy.
This Paul, during my time in Colombia, there was the heavy war years. Now that's passed and you weren't there during that time, but do you see any change in the people, especially Magdalena Medio, on how they're living and stuff under terms of peace?
I think that from what people told me, because you're right, I mean, like, obviously I was not there during the difficult times, but it's less of a daily facet of people's lives. Like they are thinking about violence, but in a different way. Now there's a lot of environmental violence, for example, like against activists and leaders. But if you're not that, it's a lot less of a concern on a day-to-day basis from what people have told me. But that's also been changing the last year or so. Like it has been getting, worse again, but not nearly as bad as it used to be, apparently.
I was a Latin American Studies certificate at Princeton, and so this book was interesting because of the and I live in South Florida, and so we were very influenced by Latin America, so it was interesting because of the timing, because of the a lot of what I studied was the Colombia of the war time, and we had great professors who were at Princeton who had left Colombia because of it, and then kind of understanding the dynamics of Colombia today and the newer, as you said, like the rise in violence issues that they're dealing with. You touch on the Venezuelan migration issue and how much that's really affecting them now, and many other dynamics. So it's like, okay, the travel lives especially are like a moment in time, and especially places like Latin America where I feel like so much has changed and is changing in the last 20 years that 2 years later, it's a different place.
Yeah, it's almost frustrating. The Colombia that I wrote about in this book has already changed so drastically, but it is a snap. That's exactly, it doesn't try to be anything else. A snapshot in time of a place in time and its people.
Keeps you employed. It's right. Why you have to go back.
Exactly.
Well, if there are no other questions for Jordan, we'll let you go. Thank you so much for joining us. It was really great to have you. And
yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me. And sorry, it was a little bit all last minute on my end, but this was a real pleasure. And I'm always grateful that people are reading the book so thoughtfully and thinking about it and talking about it. So it's a total pleasure for me.
great. Thanks.
Thank you.
thank you.
I've got to run, but take care,
Right.
everybody.
Yep.
And hopefully I will be in Florida sometime soon and we can all
Please let us
have
know.
this together.
Absolutely.
Yeah, will do. Okay. Bye. Thanks.
So I think we still have a half an hour left or 20 minutes to talk about the book. I think it was really great to have Jordan, though, to kind of give us that background on how it came to be written and what he was trying to do. Let me just open this up. Any observations that people want to make about the book?
This is like a precept. I've not read the book.
Oh no!
It's hard for me to get books here. So
I can send you one, Paul, if you made the effort to get on this call. You probably have a APO address that I can send.
No, I don't under my contract. I don't this time, but I can
Okay.
give you my home address and my wife will bring it down the next time
Okay.
she comes. Yeah.
All right, it's in TigerNet, right? So I can find that.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, I'll send you one.
Oh, thank you.
So for those of us who read the book, ladies, gentlemen, any observations? I'll tell you one of the questions that President Eisgruber asked of the freshmen. He said that Jordan could have told his story differently, but he chose to focus on people as opposed to history, economy, environment. They were sort of tangential issues but still was the focus on people. And so the question that the president asked was, what are the strengths and weaknesses of this approach? And any reactions to that question?
So I think that it's focused on people, but he just like he said, like his story kind of was woven in to help. It gives you form. People also give you form, and so while it's focused on people, I thought he did a really good job of also bringing in that history, in a relevant way, right? So because I was like, I'm not writing a history book, right? So
Right.
you use the people to bring in the history, and through following their stories, because there's some of the people you're talking about, the guy who's 70 years old, lived there forever. You're getting that history there, and you're getting some of the people who are doing activism and those stories. So they're providing the context for that in a very real way. But I also think he did it, so to not fully answer the question, I think he did a good job of bringing in history or literature. Like I love the references to Garcia Marquez throughout and the other
Yes.
Colombian literature, and so you got a feel of. He's used some other tools as well to kind of give you a greater feel of the larger Colombian culture, not just an individual story, because they were really getting that story of the Magdalena and Colombia. Not just because sometimes when you focus on people too much, you just get a person, and it could be a person who's anywhere. But using people and not just a person to really tell the larger story of Colombia and the Magdalena.
I'm a big history reader, and as much as I liked his profiles, and some of them I thought were really, really good, I miss that historical context. I mean, I know he brought it in a little bit. He talked about the golden days on the river and a town that was built with oil money, but I felt like it was it made me want to read more about the history of Colombia and what brought it to the point where it is today, which I know almost nothing about. So that was a little disappointing to me about the book, that it didn't tell me more about the background and the context.
I think in some ways that's how I felt about the characters. I mean, I think the characters toward the end of the book seemed so much more interesting because we knew so much more about them.
Yes.
I think in the beginning, I kind of felt like we were just observing, but not really getting to know the people much. What I also did enjoy about the book, though, was I'm from Trinidad originally, and it sort of reminded me of some of the activities I did as a kid that I'd sort of long forgotten, making kites with, pieces of plants and, pieces of paper and so it sort of brought back a lot of really fond memories, or even some of the fairy tales were sort of similar, the whole duende. I remember we had a similar kind of character in Trinidad who, stalked children at night, so it made me sort of go back and do some of the research about my own history, which is what I liked about the book, that it kind of sort of wanted you to go back to your ancestral, place and learn more about it.
Yep. It was
Just to hit on to react to Pat, because so I think if you're familiar with Colombia, I had some of that background from undergrad, but but it's kind of the nature of the story that he's telling and the work that he does and the writing that he does, right? So it's the nature of like a travel, right? That travel writer
Yes.
is, it's not a history writer. So it's the context of the of what we're reading.
And I think the other, and maybe this is true for any book that is so personal, but I read some comment somewhere that the value he found in these conversations he had with people along the river was that it helped him to understand himself. And I think that did come out as the book went on. You know, we knew more about him, and he probably knew more about himself as he went through these. So if you view this not just as a ride on the river, but as a personal journey, I think it's very well done. You know, it's it makes me want to read more by him. You know, I thought he was good in that sense.
I got a question about one of the stories. When he went to go looking for the hippos, did you guys how much of a tension did you experience when, like, as far as was he gonna find them or not? Did you experience that?
I was fully expecting he wasn't going to find them. You know, I thought it was a buildup, and he's going to be on the river, and there was nothing there. So
it definitely got my attention for sure. I was rooting for him. And then also it was a nice touch when he turned that corner right to the actual river. Like the first time he saw the river.
Yeah.
I thought that those two parts of that story were really interesting. On the point about the history. So I didn't come into it expecting, you know, a lot of history. So I could see how, you know, the discussions of the FARC and, you know, that dynamic could have been a little bit less than someone who was more interested in that history would have wanted. But just in general, one thing that stood out to me was that he mentioned the economics of each of the towns he came across and the economic life of the river. And that just started to bring my attention to like how kind of arbitrary livelihood can, you know, livelihoods can come and go. Arbitrarily, livelihoods can come and go. You know, the mouth of the river used to be a big trading post, and then all of a sudden it stopped being so valuable. And then the violence there, you know, reduced its you know, vitality, or its, you know, the practicality of that spot. And then also we had the sediment that made it harder to put the liners on the river at the point where I think it was around the time he was looking for the hippos, and how that town died to the point where the father who purchased the ocean lining business or the steamship business ended up killing himself, it sounded like.
Yeah.
For like just the fact that place, like the economics just dried up so quickly there. So in that respect, like, yeah, I could see how the history might have been a little bit less than one would have wanted. At the same time, just the general concept of the economic history to me was it was stimulating in the sense of just, you know, it can come and go so quickly, and just what people value can change so quickly.
It's always a shock to read about how, I know this is true, but you know, when you see it, that families go hungry because fish are dying off in this river, and they can't put food on the table every night because of that. You know, it's a sobering thought compared to the life that we lead.
No, and but I think, like, to the, you know, the question about like writing for people, and Abram's point about the economics is, you know, because he wrote it for people, like in a lot of ways, because I'm like, that's the history, right? So the history is, right, you would have written about in the 30s, there was this industry, and this industry did this, and you know, and then they lose this industry because, you know, US investment, whatever the point is, and then the war, and we're following that, but we are not listening to it or getting the story in that historical context, but really just from the story of the individuals. And a lot of times I do think that we get those stories, right? We hear the story of the Depression, for instance, and it's like, okay, well, people were hungry, but you get this guy's story of, you know, of how they started their business, or, you know, happened to start their business, and then, you know, how the business flourishes, and really like how it dies again. To give us a little bit of that historical context.
Yeah, it's definitely like the story that shows you that you have no control over anything, really. I mean, Abram, you're talking about, you know, the economical changes. But I mean, this is happening here. You know, one day you're working for Twitter, and next day you're gone, and you got to figure out where you're going to move to, and you got to figure out, you know, it's like everywhere you turn, it's sort of the same thing. And the other thing you commented on, I did like the way his description, because you actually felt you were there a lot. Like you were climbing those rocks with him, you were feeling that heat with him. So he had the gift of description and describing the environment that he was in, which I really liked.
I saw one other comment that about his interest in seeking out the oldest members of the communities that he was going through, and how he was able to sort of commune with the past, or to contact the past, because these people had this good memory. And I think similarly, the whole thing of understanding himself better, that is a skill that not all young people have. To sit down with old people and kind of draw their stories out and feel empathy and and identify with their life's experience. He was good at that. He said maybe you all watched this, the assembly at the university, that he felt that he was well prepared for that because his family was a family of storytellers, and with the disparate backgrounds, with Syria to Argentina and Baghdad to the U.S., that all of his grandparents and his aunts and uncles, they were always telling stories of their life, and that prepared him to go out and talk to other people about their stories. So he was good at that. Well, I'm running out of my questions here. Anything else that people would like to talk about on this book?
Well, I just want to say thanks for organizing this, because I really enjoyed it. And I don't always participate, but I really forced me to read the book, which I had sitting here for quite a while, and I really enjoyed it. So thank you.
I hesitate to admit that I finished it last night, but you're right. There's nothing like knowing that you have to walk into class to make you.
I beat you, Pat. I finished it like an hour ago. But it reminds me of school. This is how
it is. It's just like school, except usually I
was.
never finish the book for school. So, well, this is great. Thank you for coming on this. I think even though this was a small group, I think we had a better discussion maybe because of it. And certainly having Jordan join us really was the icing on the cake. So I would do this again. It was a good event.
No, I appreciate you organizing it, Pat. And
Thank you.
Yeah,
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Good.
you, Pat. Thank you.
See you later. Okay.
All right.
Bye.
Bye, guys.